17 U.S.C. 107 federal law allows citizens to use copyrighted media for fair use. That is criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody.
Kuma, Yahweh, we are put so you there, we are listening for Neka. Kuma, Yahweh, we are put so all you there, we are new so Misaneka. Kuma, Yahweh, we are put so you there, we are new so Misaneka. Arise of you, O Yahweh, let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Let all of Yasharah, Yisrael, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh, give him thanks by saying Hallelujah.
And welcome to Into All Truth and Live Light Well. We welcome donations, and we thank you everyone for donations that you made for calendars and cookbooks, which the update should be coming out before the new Hebrew year, the new Israelite year. And so make a donation of $20 or more at livelightwell.com and you will get the calendar and the cookbook. Just remind me to send you an update once you've purchased it with a proof of receipt. We thank you for everyone who's donated, and I pray that as you listen to this study that the Ruach HaKodesh will lead you into all truth and show you things to come. Baruch atah kulam, in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach. Amunah. Shalom, family. So this is a continuation of America is Africa, and Africa is AFIYAH, or AETHEOPIA. So sometimes the F is pronounced as a P for Panem, face of Yah, and that is the true land of Israel. And if you'll remember in the last lesson, we talked about how what is now the Mediterranean Sea was once all land. And I actually believe that's where true Israel might have been. But that was the gates of Gibor or Gibraltar, or the pillars of Hercules. And so we're going to continue on into the word Afra. And in our final series, we're going to go into, and stay tuned because we're going to show you the largest pyramids in the world and prove where they are as we get to the end of this. So please get through the technical aspects of the word, the actual names of the land, because that is very important, because we know Yah's word is important, and we are Israel. We are children of the book, people of the book, and so we're concerned first and foremost about the word. So we get that straight, then we can understand everything else. The look and appearance of the people, and we can see where there was a merging of the Israelites and Hamites over in America, as well as the Hamites with the Gentiles over in America. And we'll end up with some more descriptions of the land and the people. And I will give you a sneak preview of the people for next week. I already told you that the world was remapped, and that this was the remapping of the world minus the West, and that they conspired to hide the West. And then, of course, in about 600 BC, the map El Mundo was set up as the earliest known map of the world in history. It was propagated as the earliest known map in history. And then this version was developed by Herodotus, really conspired to hide it. But this is a closer representation of it. And this map from Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx, this wall relief map, is another map of the world that's a pretty good representation if you understand the symbolism. Definitely not saying that I have all the answers, but as you guys know, reverse Pangea is a big deal in figuring out the locations of the allotments of the lands and where everyone is going to go back to, in particular Israel, who's going to return across by Yah smiting the 7 streams and returning back to the land of AFIYAH, the face of Yah. And so you know I like to use reverse Pangea so we can see all of the connections between the lands. And in addition to that, a great witness is the witness of the moon. The sun and the moon and the stars are to be witnesses in the heavens. The moon doesn't really help us count time, but it is a witness to this moment of destruction and the lands that were once between Africa and Ham's land. And there have been many conflagrations, many destructions over the earth that enabled this to happen and occur. And in particular, one of them was the Exodus, the first Exodus. There's more coming. That's why there's going to be more calamities. And there are even more conflagrations and calamities that happened in the earth after the fall of Israel that further divided lands. And I already mentioned that, as we said before, and I just said again, that what we know now as the Mediterranean Sea was not there. That was previously land. And so it gives you an indication of how much things are changed. And so once again, we're going to go into the fact that a promise was made to the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that their line would be able to continue through eternity. And that salvation would come through the line of Shem and by extension through the line of Israel and the children of Israel, who would then go on and graft the other nations back in. And Japheth would end up with the identity of Israel for a season as a test. But then Yah would yet redeem Israel again to the land for the second Exodus. And he would smite the 7 streams so that Israel could walk over dry shod. And so maybe that's some of the reason for all the volcanoes and stuff going off in the place between America and Africa. But let's get into why each man must return to his own land and why we have to know who these nations are, who everyone is. Now, the Bible warns, do not be consumed with foolish genealogies. Well, that's the genealogies of the fallen. We don't need to worry about their genealogies, just the genealogy of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so we know that Babylon is Mitzrayim, and we're going to go further on into that. It's Egypt, all these different rebrandings of the name of the land of the fallen. That's why it changes so much. And according to the scripture, at the fall of Babylon, which is coming now, each man must return to his own land. Cut off the sower from Babylon. So it's a real land. It's a place where you sow seed. And he that handleth the sickle in the time of harvest, for fear of the oppressing sword, that they shall turn every one to his people, and they shall flee every one to his own land. That means Babylon's going to be destroyed. There's no hiding in the mountains or sowing seed. Somebody wonderful just reminded me of that. And how it will, the hammer of the whole earth, we know that America is the power of the whole earth, the military is cut asunder and broken down. How is Babylon become a desolation among nations? It's going to be desolate here, so we got to get out. And that's everyone, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And even the Amorites and Canaanites. And for the work of Yahuwah is in the land of the Chaldeans. So this is the land of Ham that we're talking about. He's calling it the land of the Chaldeans because at one point when the first captivity happened, it was the land of the Chaldeans. Okay? But now it is the land of the Amorites. Come against her, and the Europeans, right? Japheth. Come against her utmost border, open her storehouses, and cast her up as heaps, and destroy her utterly. Let nothing be left. That means there's nothing going to be left here. Thus saith Yahuwah of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Yehudah were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast, and they refused to let them go. This is why we have the borders shorn up, right? The sword is upon their horses and upon their chariots, and upon all the mingled people, the mixed multitude of Babylon, right? Different nations. And they shall become as a woman when a sword is thrust upon her treasures, and they shall be robbed. So the destruction of Babylon is imminent, and anybody who believes in the Savior and our Creator has got to get out. I mentioned Shem, Ham, and Japheth because they were in the times of Noah, and so now it's time for Shem, Ham, and Japheth to get out again. This is the second Exodus time, the second Exodus of Israel out of the final captivity, and the Gentiles will cling to Israel. So that means Japheth and Ham, come on and cling, okay? So the crucial time in these times is the identity of Israel, first and foremost, and secondly, the true lands of every people group. Why? Because according to Matthew, as in the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be, okay? And what will be happening in these last days? Isaiah 13:13, for the heavens shall be enraged, and the earth shall be shaken from her foundation because of the fierce anger of Yahuwah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, in the day when his wrath shall come on. And they that are left shall be as like a fleeing fawn, a stray sheep, and there shall be none to gather them, so that a man shall turn back to his own people, and a man shall flee to his own land. However, now the promise of Yah is that Yah is searching for his people, and he, with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm, will return them. And this is why the Gentiles will cling to Israel. So, but nonetheless, whatever choice you make, you got to return to your own land to be within the law. So you're in the house of Israel, or you return to your own land. So just for a quick review, the lands were divided post-flood between Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Of course, Shem, being the eldest son, according to the law and Torah, got a double portion. That means he got half the planet. And Ham and Japheth each got a quarter. So that's law. So start there. The other thing was that they agreed to be cursed if they went outside of their own lands. And everybody is outside of their lands, almost everyone. Jubilees 8 talks about the lands of Ham. Check out the last video to review the lands of Ham. The lands of Japheth, it says, is cold, and the lands of Ham is hot, and the land of Shem is neither hot nor cold, but it is of blended cold and heat. So Shem, being their firstborn son, as I've said many times in Torah, in the law, the firstborn son gets a double portion. So that means he gets twice what the other sons get. So he would have gotten half the earth. That's Torah. And the law doesn't change, okay? And so one of the curses that all the nations were bound with, all three of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, was this. Jubilees 9:14. And the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and he bound them all by an oath, imprecating a curse on every one that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by his lot. And they all said, so all the sons of Noah said, so be it, for themselves and their sons forever, throughout their generations, till the day of judgment, on which the Most High Yah shall judge them with a sword and with fire, for all the unclean wickedness of their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression and uncleanness and fornication and sin. So this is a judgment to everyone who's gone outside of their lands. So America is actually Africa, and Africa is AFIYAH, or Asia, which is really AFIYAH, which the etymology, I believe, comes from Ethiopia, AFIYAH, okay? Because it's the Ethiopic Sea, the Ethiopic Ocean that is between South America and Africa. And you can see that Africa was called Ethiopia previously, okay? And every time you look up Ethiopia in scripture, the real Hebrew word for it is Cush. And so there's no etymology for Ethiopia. There's no Ethiopians identified. The closest word to Ethiopia, Hebraically, would be AFIYAH, Ethiopia. And so here's some clues as to where that might have come from and how the Canaanites, the Asians, the Hamites are trying to co-opt it, to take it. So as I said in videos from almost 8 months ago, originally Africa was not called Africa. It was called AFIYAH. And actually, the West, the United States and Canada, was called Africa, the West. But what is called the Atlantic Ocean was called the Ethiopic Ocean. And what is called East Africa and West Africa was formerly called Upper Ethiopia and Lower Ethiopia. What does this mean? Well, when the African diaspora goes home, we want to know we're going to the right place. After all, if everyone keeps saying go back to where you came from and it's Africa, we are where we came from. In Blue Letter Bible, we see how many times it appears here, all right? And every single one of these, when we go to tools and we look at it in the Hebrew, it is listed as, scroll down here, Cush. Now Cush was, as we already went over in the genealogies, Cush was one of the sons of Ham. And so they're saying the Cushites were the son of Ham. But remember in the last video that I showed you, and so we see Cush is one of the sons of Ham, and Sheba, Havilah, Ramah, Dedan, they all descend from Cush, okay? And so they're saying, and that's always what black people are called in the Middle East. A lot of people say Cushi, and you see how many times it appears in all of these scriptures. It's always appearing as Cush, but the word Ethiopia is very hard to find. We very quickly learned that those who they call Egyptians today are not actually Egyptians, the Egyptians in Africa. And they say that the Egyptians were Negroes. Okay? So this is from a number of ancient books. They're saying the real Egyptians were Negroes. There's a quote from Zondervan's Bible Dictionary that often comes up, and it says, Ham was the father of the dark races, but not the Negroes, but he was the father of the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. However, this may be incorrect. Okay, that's what Zondervan's Bible Dictionary says that. Okay, this is now under dispute as having been a quote from a Jewish scholar in the last 100 years. The Ethiopians say the Egyptians are one of their colonies. And they talk about Sheba and Dedan being in Ethiopia, so it may be that they started to call themselves Ethiopians once they mixed in with Shem. And we know from the witness of Jasher and Jubilees that and if you speak to Eritreans, they will say that their father is Dawid, because the queen of Sheba had a son with Solomon, and as well Keturah had 7 sons with Abraham. And so they may have become the Ethiopians, okay? Because they were sons of Abraham, but not the sons of the promise. And so that may be the true origins of the Ethiopians. And the Egyptians here very clearly says that Gaston Maspero said that the almost unanimous testimony of ancient historians is that they belong to the African race, read Negro, which first settled in Ethiopia. On the Middle Nile, following the course of the river, they gradually reached the sea. Moreover, the Bible states that Mitzrahim, son of Ham, brother of Cush, the Ethiopian, so he's calling them the Ethiopian, and of Canaan came from Mesopotamia to settle with his children on the banks of the Nile. So he's saying that they were an import, okay? But they're still not giving us the origins of this term, okay? And they're trying to say that all of the engravers and hieroglyphics in Ethiopia are not related to the Ethiopian, in Egypt and so on, are not related to the Ethiopians. But once again, it says that the Negroes is represented on Pharaoh paintings so clearly delineated by the engravers. So this is maybe a bit confusing. It's still confusing for me, but it seems like there's two different words being used for the land of Ham and the land of Shem, and they sound very much the same. One is AFIYAH or AETHEOPIA, and the other is Africa. Okay, so Africa is Ham, and AFIYAH or AETHEOPIA is for Shem. And when we look in the scripture, they both kind of relate to Ophir or gold, but you can pretty well narrow them down to these two different words representing these two different lands. And so this is going to seem very confusing, but I'm going to try to do my best because I'm still kind of figuring it out myself. And, you know, Yah is not the author of confusion, so we know who's responsible for this. So the Ethiopians seem to be a grafting in of Ham into the Negro line. Once again, Isaiah 49 says that, behold, these will come from afar, lo, these will come from the north and from the west, and those from the land of Sinim. So the west and the north and Sinim, Canada means Canaan, that's the land of Ham, okay? And so even in this slide here, referring again to Asiatic researches, this word afar comes, or Pharoh comes from the west. So let's look into it again. AhpaYah. So that's the root word is Pharoh, is of for AhpaYah. So Asiatic Researches or Transactions Volume 8 says that Canaan, so now when we're dealing with Canaan, we're dealing with the fallen angel's children, so it's going to be a little confusing. In his interesting account of the learning and manners of the Burmas, now there's a Burma in Southeast Asia, but there are multiple Burmas in West Africa, like in Nigeria and Ghana, okay? So that'll tell you something. So the Canaan informs us that in the country of Burma, they generally use the letter I for R. So if they're going to say Ra, they're going to say Ya, okay? So, but in the Bengali dialect, they say Pharoh. So this is the very difference between East and West. So it's either AhpaYah or Pharoh. So Ham would say Pharoh because that relates to the god Ra, but Israel would say AhpaYah. So one is saying face of Ra, their fake god, and the other one is saying face of Yah, the true God. Okay? So there's a difference right there. When we're talking about the West, in the Bengali dialect, they say Pharoh, and they say the river Osus is called AhpaYah. So that's almost like Osiris or Ozus. We'll say, okay, so AhpaYah Gandid or AhpaYah Ganges or Western Gattaca, whence we may safely conclude that they also said AhpaYah for the West. So they're talking about the West. All right? This is just what I'm figuring it out, and I'm figuring it out as I'm reading this, as I selected this. But then it also says that Ephraim and AhpaYah, so now they're saying Yah instead of Ra, are regular derivative forms from AhpaYah. But here's the interesting thing, and from them is obviously derived Iberia, the ancient name of the western parts of Europe, including Gaul and Spain. So Ephraim or Ephraim and AhpaYah is associated with Israel and Iberia, the south and the east. But now they go ahead and they start calling Western Europe the West, mixing apples and oranges. Now, sorry to digress here a little bit, but remember the Mediterranean was filled in by a great tumult, right? But when we look at King James and we look at Charles I, his son, him pleading for mercy, close up in this photo we see calico. Ephraim is coat of many colors, Joseph, calico. And of course, Hibernia and that end of Europe, and even in Western Africa, both Western Africa and Western Europe were called calico or gallico, okay? And there, Iberia being the name of the western parts of Europe, including Gaul or Gaalico, and Spain. Homer uses in that sense the appellations or names of Hyperia and APHYAH. Okay, so that's really, that would be Hibernia, and here they're trying to say Aphira, like Africa. So what they're calling Africa at the time of Homer, they're calling the continent of Africa that we now know as Africa, AFIYAH, right? This is at the point where they're switching around the names, but there's an association of AFIYAH with Ephraim, with Hibernia, Hiberia, and with Aphira, or Ophir, gold. Very confusing, you see? But when you look at it in terms of the face of Yah versus the face of Ra, it's kind of a little easier to figure it out. And they connect it to Western Europe, which is all part of the same continent. Okay, so we're going to get into the Hebrew words that are related to this that will help us to differentiate between the two continents and the two people. We're going to go into Shem and how the lands were divided, but we find out that one of the sons of Shem got all the lands west of the continent in the islands. So all of those places like Atlantis and the Azores, etc., would have been his lands, right? Guys, bear with me in this lesson because we'll get to the juicy, juicy stuff in the next lesson, but there is some exciting stuff in here. But here's just a simple name search for the name AFIYAH, the girl's name. And this is just a simple generic Google search. Baby girl name AFIYAH is pronounced AFIYAH. Origin of AFIYAH is English. AFIYAH is a derivative of the African name Africa. And it's baby names that sound like AFIYAH include Aber, Abiri, Abira, Hebrew, Abiri, Abria. You can do a simple search for the etymology. So if Ephraim was in the sea, could these be some of the lands that Abraham got in redeeming the land for Shem? And the ships of Tarshish, Tarshish, Tarsh husband, married to Tarsh, could be Tartaria, further east. It even includes all the mountains of Ararat, and all the region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur towards the north, a blessed and spacious land. So that includes Ararat, which Japheth currently has right now and is calling Turkey. So his land is way more restricted. And so it's derived from Iberia. So we see the overlap of Africa, Asia, Iberia. This is an overlapping of the names, right? The transitioning, this flipping of identities here. So it can be very confusing. I mean, I was just like, we were all confused about it. But we have to go back through this to unpick this mess. So here's a quote from 1 Kings 9:28. And so we're going to look at the biblical origins of the word Aphara, okay, in depth. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold 420 talents and brought it to King Solomon. So here is the word for Ophir in Hebrew here. And I use the pictographic because it's easiest to understand. It's the only Hebrew I like. Ophir is a very celebrated region abounding in gold, and the sailors of Solomon went thither together with the Phoenicians from the ports of the Atlantic Gulf and brought every 3 years precious stones, gold, and sandalwood. So the Atlantic Ocean is the Ethiopic Ocean. Now remember, the Mediterranean wasn't there. The Mediterranean was flooded. So at this time, probably the time of Solomon, it wasn't there. The Mediterranean Sea wasn't there. There's all these cities underwater there. So they would go west from there, west from Gibraltar. And so when we look at the word, we see in this Hebrew here, it's Aleph, P for mouth, Pharoh, Yah, Yod for Yah, and Resh, AFIYAH, AFIYAH, AFIYAH. So AFIYAH. So this one is different from that Aphara. This is AFIYAH. Okay? And this one's AFIYAH. So this one has a U, a double Y or a W. AFIYAH. 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 And so they went to this land, and they say it's in southern Arabia, towards Arabia and towards India to go west, or it's towards beyond the Atlantic to go to North America to go west. Aleph, Pei, Resh. Here's 6080. So that was Strong's H211, where they got gold, and it's the AFIYAH. 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 AFIYAH, I don't know. Aleph, Oz, mouth of Yah. Okay. Now this is a different one. All right. This is Afra. Afra. And it's spelled ayin, all-seeing ayin of the face of the Resh. So this is different. This one is dealing with the Aleph, which would be Yah. His awe and his mouth speaking, his Yod, his right hand of the Resh. So this could very well be Arabia and into the lands of other Shemites to get gold. Southern Arabia, that makes sense because it's a Shemitic name. The promise of the firstborn head, Resh, son, the Aleph's word spoken, the right hand of the Resh. Now when we look at this word, this is the ayin, like the all-seeing eye, and the mouth of that Resh. This is a different name. And so this is Strong's H60. David, his men, went along the hills over against him and cursed as he went, threw stones at him and cast dust at him. This is the word for dust. Okay? And it means dry earth, debris, mortar, which is what they made the pyramids out of, was mortar. Ore, which is gold, which is what man is made out of, the dust of the earth, which includes gold. Okay? And this is afar. But again, this is with an ayin. These are both with an ayin. See, it make it look like a yod, like it's Yah's right hand, associating with Yah, but it's not. It's an eye. It's an all-seeing eye, like the one single eye on the pyramid. So it's different. It's not Yah. It's not the Aleph, and it's not the Yod. Even though this is why I don't like Yiddish brew, because they steal, they confuse. They're giving you a Yod like it's Yah for his right hand. It's not. It's a lie. So Exodus 8:16 says, and Yahuwah said to Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. So this is the same word for dust. So it can be mortar, debris, dry loose earth, and ore, which are all the things we were potentially made from, or that temples are made from. And this is why we're a temple not built with human hands. And Jerusalem is a people, not a city. Okay? Because all buildings, cities, people, all made with the dust of the earth. Okay? Dust, dry earth, clay. Okay? Fine dust. Dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind. So there it is, even rubbish. Okay? Okay, and they throw dust on their heads, right? When they're in judgment or punishment or praying for mercy from Yah, right? So This is afar, afar. We're going to talk a bit more about afar. So now here is the use of the word in this context. Sorry for the big diversion into Shem, but we have to understand these things, and it is in relation to the son of the promise, because he is grafting into the other nations and redeeming them, right? Okay, so Plato said in this Atlantis, the antediluvian world, that in Atlantis there was a great and wonderful empire which aggressed wantonly against the whole of Europe and Asia, thus testifying to the extent of its dominion. So they were always warring and fighting and taking over and ruling, which is why you see all of these huge structures all over the earth that they erected, these giants and everything. And thus testifying to the extent of its dominion. It not only subjugated Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Italy, but it ruled as well over part of the continent, to wit, the opposite continent of America. So it as well ruled over part of the continent, the opposite continent, America, okay, which surrounded the true ocean. See, that statement about the true ocean makes me really wonder if the Indian Ocean wasn't the only sea at the time, and if, in fact, Africa was knitted together with South, Central, and North America, and so was the land of Japheth in the north, Mongolia, and then the kind of fishtail we see here of leading from Asia down to Australia wasn't just butted right up against South and Central America. And so the only sea would truly be the one up at the top in the center of the earth, and the Indian Ocean that's between Asia and Africa. I showed you guys in my video about Esau and what he did to the world after the fall of Israel. I told you that according to Oriental Masonry, America is known to be Atlantis by the mystics, okay? Ancient Mystic, page 26, America known to the mystic as Atlantis, when this ruin befell, was the seat of the greatest empire that ever existed, and its irresistible armies were terrorizing all Europe and Asia. Of this there is no doubt. The pyramids were built by the Atlanteans for centuries before Egypt was a civilized society. Why then did they build in Egypt instead of some part of what is now America? Because Egypt was then the center of the earth, and the Atlanteans, with their vast knowledge, sought the center for all that will stand as long as time. Okay? Those parts of America over which it ruled were, as we will show hereafter, Central America, Peru, the valley of the Mississippi, Missouri, Mitzrayim, right? That's one of the sons, remember we saw, of Ham, Mitzrayim, Mississippi, Missouri, occupied by the mound builders. So there's all these accounts of mound builders, which we're going to go into later. Okay. All right, so more on the origins of the word, on Atlantis and the origins of the word, the afar. Okay. The Irish Annals, so this is going back to the land since the whole of the Mediterranean was flooded. We're going back to this whole idea that all of that land was the land of Shem, and it was the land, major portion of the land of Shem that was given to Abraham for his seed to multiply like the sand of the sea, which they did, more than any other nation. So the Irish Annals, again, this is from the Atlantis book, speak of the Morians, as a warlike race who, according to the annals of Clonmatius, were a sect descended from Ham, the son of Noah. So here they're using the C-H-A-M, right? So Ham, the son of Noah, and lived by Farsi, all right, Farsi, and spoiled of other nations. and were in those days very troublesome to the whole world. So there's the word Pharoh again in there, okay? Were not these the inhabitants of Atlantis who, according to Plato, carried their arms to Egypt and Athens, and whose subsequent destruction has been attributed to divine violence invoked by their arrogance and oppressions? So this is this judgment against this seed that sprang forth in the form of giants through Ham's offspring, okay? Just like Nimrod was a giant, right? The Fomorians were from Atlantis. They were called Formhoric. Now there's in the line of Mount Seir, the Rephaim, who come up from out of the sea, from the netherworld, we have the Horites. Okay, the Horites are some of the seed which they're not to intermingle with because they're fallen angels. And there's also the Amorites. So this is me right here, who are along the Canaanite line. So these are fallen angel seed, form Horak, the Horites, the Amorites. So more, this is where the word more comes from. Amorites, because they were in the land of Shem. So you have Mount Moriah, because they named things after themselves that were not, that when they weren't even in their own land, they named things after themselves. Morites, Morians, Mount Moriah, Amorites. That's all Canaan in the land of Israel, calling the land of Israel his land by naming it after his children. So the Formoreg, Afric, Apharic, and the Og of Bashan, Formorog of Bashan, so that's another one of the fallen angel, Og, which had been rendered into English as Fomorians. They possessed ships, and the uniform representation is they came, as the name for Morag Africa indicated, from Africa. From Africa. But in that day, Africa did not mean the continent of Africa as we now understand it. Major Wilford, in the 8th volume of the Asiatic Researchers, okay, so I've been quoting from that book already, has pointed out that Africa comes from afar, Afara, Africa, terms used to signify the West. Just as we now speak of the Asiatic world as the East. Okay, so he's even saying, oh, we now call the Asiatic world the East, but it's actually the West. When, therefore, the Fomorians claimed to come from Africa, they simply meant that they came from the West. Okay? In other words, from Atlantis, for there was no other country except America west of them. So they were probably dwelling there, the ships of Tyre in Atlantis, trying to dwell in the best land, right? Prince of Tyre dwelling there off the coast of Israel, right, which would be all of the continent of Africa, because remember, there was no, again, Shinar, whether you want to call it Atlantis, whichever one of the brothers got that land. It was then taken over by Nimrod. They were the great nation coming against the nation, and also Egypt possibly ruled from there as well, whatever chunks was left over after the first damage done by Babel, right? But there's these 3 different lands again. And then it says, yet later geographers make of this only 2 parts, crafting Africa into Europe, supporting the mountains of Calphe and Abele, now the jaws of Gibraltar, where opened by an earthquake, receiving them also an inundation from the Atlantic, which now makes the Mediterranean Sea, being before all continued land. So in other words, what we know to be the Mediterranean Sea, or Italy and all that stuff, was not underwater before. When this great earthquake happened, it broke through the gates of Gibraltar and the water flooded in. See, the gates of Gibraltar are also called the gates of Gibor, and it relates back to Isaiah 28:21. So, for Yahuwah shall raise up as in Mount Perazim, he shall be wrath as in the valley of Gibeon. He shall do his strange work, his strange act. Okay? So Gibor was once a valley, and now it's flooded with water and called the Mediterranean. Okay, the gates of Gibraltar, the gates of Gibor, which that valley led to Egypt when the continents were connected. So what's interesting here when we look at this ancient map of the world that emerged through the Europeans as they were beginning to discover the West again. So the illustrations are not quite, correct yet, but we do see this giant mermaid or fishtail, which is the total symbol of Babylon, is the great fish, Dagon, the god, the fish god. Okay? Going all the way down to, when this map was drawn, they hadn't quite figured out what the map really looked like, so they were figuring it out still. So it shows Australia as being here, but it's really kind of over here. And you see they had already unified Europe as one here and Africa as something separate. Now, when we talk about the 10 tribes, they were sent away to Eretz Azarath, according to 2nd Esdras 1343. Now, when we break the actual letters down, here they are in the pictographic Hebrew, it means another place, final place, the end, vanishing point, time out of line, Eretz, another strange end, prosperity, hindermost reward. I want you to remember that word, hindermost, hindumost reward. And remember, I've already said that these people got gold from afar. Also, when the Israelites return to their land, they'll come from a hinder place, and they'll return from afar, and they'll return from a second Egypt that they would have gone to on ships. So the vision of the prophet Zechariah is that Shinar would be set up in its place. It would be two women, like there is a northern and a southern kingdom. There always was. In Egypt, it was divided by north and south. That's why they try to show Ethiopia as having a northern and southern realm in one of the maps. But really, that's the nature of Egypt, to be divided that way. Canada and the United States, right? Babylon. Okay, and so what does the scripture say about Shinar being set up? It says, then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there came out two women, and the wind was in their wings, for they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up an ephah, so a basket measuring, between earth and heaven. And he said unto me, to build it an house in the land of Shinar, and it shall be established and set there upon her own base. So being that it's Shinar, you know that it's part of the lands of Shem. Because remember, Nimrod set up his empire in Shinar. So there is part of the lands of Shem that extend into North America, okay? But that's not necessarily the land of Israel, but that's why we might have the 10 tribes dwelling there. So this is the setup of Babylon in its place in the Hindu-most land, in the land of Shinar or Babel or Missouri, okay? Missouri. So you'll recall that earlier I discussed that AhpaYah related to the pharaohs and the Western ones. I went into a lot of detail on that in the previous video. So we're going to talk about the face and the image, the buildings and structures in the West that confirm that it actually is Egypt. According to an 1858 Rathman's Journal in the Antiquities in America, it says, strange as it may appear, America abounds in antiquities so extensive, so beautiful and majestic as to rival those of Thebes or Nineveh. Ruins of ancient cities of immense extent, fortifications, mounds, and pyramids, temples with walls built of hewn stone showing a refined taste, in architecture and adorned with human figures, beautifully executed, large altars ornamented with hieroglyphics, probably giving a record of those who reared them, but which no man has been able to decipher. Remains of ancient palaces with beautiful specimens of sculpture and painting with many other marks of ancient greatness prove to us that this is not a new world, but that a powerful empire existed at a very remote period in time, teeming with a population highly skilled in arts and in a state of civilization far beyond anything we have been led to conceive of the Aborigines previous to the discovery of the continent by the Europeans. These structures are going to be superior to anything that you would find in Europe or created by the Europeans. So let's get into it. And so what are some of the things that we see in the West? Well, in the West, we see in AFIYAH this giant serpent mound. Look at the size of it. It's a giant serpent under rock. So this could actually be a dead giant serpent. And on top of it, they've done this whole hedge of a serpent on top of a serpent. So it's like a serpent on a serpent. You see the vastness of it. And of course, I've shown you guys the Grand Canyon videos and the things they have in them. They have statues of Shiva. And I was like, well, what is this Shiva doing here? You heard me in the videos. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This can't be right. It looks very staged. Well, maybe not. It looks like a temple here, a pyramid. They call this the Isis temple. We see some kind of Buddhist statues. Menkaure, King Akhenaten's son here. Very Asian, right? So let's talk about these ancient structures that the people dwelt in. And so here's probably the part that's a little less technical, a little more exciting. And these are these ancient geostructures. And of course you see the Hamites dwelling in them comfortably. And those are pictures from America by John Ogilvy. So according to ancient monuments of North and South America, it refers to the people who had built them, the Toltecas, or the American Atlantes, as being quite a different people from the later Mexican tribes, and that their monuments are equal to those of Egypt, Syria, such as with colossal and even cyclopean structures, which, you know, is pretty obvious. And it says, I have traced them in America from Missouri to Chile, but their central seats and empires were in Mexico. Or Quito, and their great temple at Otulam or near Planake was equal to Solomon's temple. Their mythology was quite peculiar and Asiatic. It was quite peculiar and Asiatic. Their main deity was Hun Aku. Hun, Attila the Hun. Ham, Hun, the Hun people. First cause, comparable to Anuki, the Syrian Cybele. Okay? So you see this Asiatic influence, okay? Meaning like Chinese or East Indian, and Hun, Aku. So Aku often means brother in Hebrew. It can also mean the Anunnaki. So we're talking about the giants, right? Because remember, in a lot of the images of the Egyptians, they have the gods, the giants, right there with them, the small people and the great. And so, and Tul means veil, veiled. So the veiled giants. Okay? I wanted you to notice this paragraph here at the bottom of this slide. And it says, the true Assyrians named the West Arkaru, as the Egyptian king Akar is the mountain of the west and the entrance to the hinder place. Hinder place. I want you to remember that name. Hinder place. Hindu place. But a far earlier people in the land, the Akkadians, called the east Merika. Okay, so this is in the Book of Beginnings. Okay, Meruka, America. So Amorite, More, Meru, Mer as in water, tons of different, and this is America, tons of different references. And here we see on the right a comparison between pyramids, okay? I'm showing you because this is the size of Khufu and Khafre, and there's supposed to be even bigger pyramids underwater beneath where Atlantis was off the coast of Gibraltar, okay? But El Mirador's top temple was way higher than Khafre or Khufu, 172 meters high. Okay, so, and it's a far older temple as well, so comparatively speaking.
What I'm looking at is sculpture that was created something like 2,000 years ago, and it's the most magnificent thing I have ever seen. I can tell you that I think this is probably the first of the 8 wonders of the world, the first of them. And if you want an experience, don't go to Stonehenge, don't go to the Great Pyramids at Cheops or Giza. Come to Guatemala. Don't go to the Great Pyramids at Cheops or Giza. Come to Guatemala and see this.
That pyramid, the largest pyramid in the world, is called Dante. So Dante's Inferno. Dante is a totally hellacious, underworld, satanic name or word. Just like how Pharaoh or fort is also related to Egypt, okay? And the empire inherited by Esau. So Dante and Pharaoh, all related to Esau and Egypt. Doesn't that man look a lot like Mr. Morgan Freeman? And you know, the free men on the land were the descendants of the Edomite Black Moors. So not the Hebrew Israelite Black Moors, but the Edomite Black Moors. And so he's looking a lot like Morgan Freeman. And as I said to you before, Edom inherited Egypt by killing Nimrod. So he inherited Babylon and Mitzrayim by killing Nimrod. In the book Ancient America, it talks about the people known as the Phoenicians were preeminent as colonizing navigators of iniquity. They were an enlightened and enterprising maritime people whose commerce traversed every known sea. And their operations extended to the Pillars of Hercules and into the greater ocean. The early Greeks called them Ethiopians, not meaning either black or men or Africans. So notice there's a difference between the two. The black men are the Negroes, the Africans are the Asians, the Hamites. And they said they went everywhere, establishing their colonies of commerce all over the coast regions and even to the extreme west. Now, this is what I'm talking about. This is the time when Esau went into the west with the Tartarian tribes to hide and cover over all of these great pyramids of antiquity to set up Babylon. Okay, so that's what they were doing. You see this upper right-hand corner. There is some of the Arab Esauians oppressing on the right, the Jacobian Israelites, right? You can tell by their hats, and then they're doing the bull sign curse on the left there. All right, so that's telling you who they are. And here's the Esau tribe of Ethiopia. And of course, we know that Esau inherited Babylon from Nimrod because he slayed Nimrod. So that put him in line for the Babylonian kingdom. So what does it say? History has knowledge of only a few of their later communities, the Sabaeans of southern Arabia, right? We know these are black people, all right? So this is black Esau, black Edomites. and it's not difficult to believe that communities of Phoenician or Ethiopian race were established all around the Mediterranean, even beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. So remember, the Mediterranean flooded, and then they were in those areas in ages quite as old as Egypt or Chaldea. Okay? So they are Chaldeans because Esau is a Shemite, right? And so some of them were Assyrians, some of them were Ishmaelites, some of them were Edomites, because he was married in with a lot of those groups of people. Why did the ancients say so much of a great Saturnian continent beyond the Atlantic if nobody in prehistoric ages had ever seen that continent? It was there, as they said, as we know it, but whence came their knowledge of it? And such knowledge has led them to describe it as larger than Asia, meaning Asia Minor. Where does the idea of Asia Minor come from? All right? Because what we know as Asia now is Asia Minor, because this is Asia Major, the United States and Canada and South and Central America, okay? According to the Foreign Review of the pyramids in the West, some of the pyramids, as we have said, are larger than those of Egypt. Some of them are different in their model, having somewhat of an Indian character, bearing strong affinity to the pyramidal temples still existent in Japan, right? Also China. See the works of Thomas Raffles. The Pyramid of Cholula exhibits a most singular identity with the model of the temples of Belus, Baal, right? Beelzebub, right? Described by Herodotus, and by which many scholars has been considered to be the scriptural Tower of Babel, okay? So here we see a tie-in to Herod. And what did Herod decide to do? He tried to hide Israel. He was hiding the east from the west. He said there was a penalty of death upon anybody who tried to venture to the west after a certain period of time. Why? Because they were doing this gigantic cover-up, okay? And doing the switcheroo of names. El Mirador had up to 1 million inhabitants at its zenith between 300 and 100 BC. El Mirador and its surrounding neighborhoods would have been the largest city in the world at that time. To accommodate so many people, the city sprawled for over 2,500 square miles, okay? In a patch of a heart-shaped jungle that's referred to as the El Mirador Basin. The city center covered 14 square miles. That's 3 times larger than downtown Los Angeles. Okay? According to the Smithsonian, El Mirador, the lost city of the Maya, had one of the first freeway systems in the world and had the largest pyramid in the world. It was home to the Mayan civilization. A 40-meter wide causeway was one of the first freeway systems in the world. It was a 12-kilometer long road running from Mirador to Nakbe. So this was known as the Khan Kingdom. Okay? And it says El Mirador's inhabitants may have initially gone to the Caribbean coast, then migrated back inland, where they finally ended up in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. And then this emerged as a powerful city-state to rival Tikal in the 6th and 7th centuries. Mirador was known as in the pre-classics as the Khan Kingdom, meaning Khan meaning snake. And the Kalkamol referred to themselves as Lords of Khan. All right? And so we know these are the Khan. So Genghis Khan. So when you think of Genghis Khan being in India or being part of the Tartarians or the Khazars or the Serpent people, this is the connection that you have. All right? Khan is Cain and Ham. So when you're talking about them being in Europe and so on, when this is their original land, what does that tell you? These are literally the serpent people who later went to India. It talks about the Khazar serpent people and the Tartars. This is who they later became, or actually were when they returned to the land. So Khan is an Egyptian word for king. The article goes into multiple platforms that established this city, which was even larger than Los Angeles. So there were multiple stages of platforms of these cities and hundreds of pyramids within this city, way larger than Giza. So according to this book called The Views of Ancient Monuments, it talks about some of the largest periods in the world again, but what I want to point out here is that Mexican temples were called teocalli, or houses of God. So that's little g, and were very numerous, all right, with several hundred in each principal cities, many of them doubtless with very humble edifices. So they had a multiplicity and multitude of temples, especially in principal cities like we just saw, okay? There were tons of different pyramids and temples within that major city. They were solid masses of earth, brick, or stone, and their form was somewhat resembled the pyramidal structures of ancient Egypt. The bases of many of them were several hundred feet square, and they towered in height of more than 100 feet. So there were multiple terrace structures like these that formed a whole city, okay? And it even says the Temple of Vesta, there were said to be 600 of these altars or smaller buildings. So each building was like an altar. So that's multiple temples like the ones in Giza. So they were huge. But I'm pointing out to you about them being called teocalli. In other words, so teocalli, right? Kali was their god. So Kali is a major Hindu god corresponding with what? California. California. Okay? So I just want you to notice and remember the name California. And forgive me, Yah, for using the whole word. Forgive me for using the names of these false deities, but I know Yah understands the context I'm using them in. So just for educational purposes. And so I want you to remember, because we already saw earlier in some of those images of the fake gods in the destroyed area of the Grand Canyon, looking very similar. Again, a multi-armed god named Kali. Okay? And forgive me again, Yah, for saying that horrendous word. All the images you've been seeing is at Osingo. So, iniquity, right? S-I-N-Go, right? And so there's an arch there at this place, and it features the winged globe of Egypt. Okay, now the word Egypt is a very late name, and it's actually a Greek name, and it incorporates the word patha in it, which is really for Ptah, Japheth, okay? So when you look up Egypt, it says the Egyptians were from the French Egypt or Greek Egyptos, the River Nile. And now the River Nile, as I said in my other videos on my other channel, Live Like Well, which is shut down at the moment, it says that it corresponds to the Egyptian Hatkapata, okay, the creative god associated with Memphis or the ancient city of Egypt. But I actually think that that Egypt is a later word that came from the Greeks, and this is when Japheth takes over Egypt and takes over the identity of Israel as well. Okay, so just now I'm just asking that question in my mind: is this associated with Japheth because it has the word Ptah in it, which is associated with Japheth? Now, why do I mention Japheth? Because we're going to see as we go into the next video about what the people looked like in these various stages of identities of the people of America, North America. We're going to see that eventually the white bearded man coming as Quetzalcoatl, or a kind of Jesus, right, is, you know, a fake Jesus comes with his cross. And this is put forwards as the original religion right now, currently, you know, by people like Kamuro Ahu, who I don't hate him. He provides so much information. There's so much stuff in here, you know, and he just seems very sweet, but he puts up all the Mason stuff. I wish he would study the scripture, and I wish he would, you know, renounce Masonism and come over to the right side. Hallelujah. But anyway, so this idea is put forwards of this Quetzalcoatl, right? The white bearded man. And so I suspect, and these are just my theories, right? That he is associated with Japheth and Santa Claus and everything from the north, the people of the north and Tartaria. But there was an original people with similar gods from the original branding, not the late rebrand of Quetzalcoatl, but the early brand, who were here previous. So I'll try and tie that in. I'm going to try to tie that in the next episode when we talk about the peoples and who the peoples of North America are related to Ham. But we already know that Khan means king, okay? You see, when we look at Quetzalcoatl, the white bearded man, he is actually Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And he's really the fourth man because he's all of them combined. He's got the white beard, he's red-skinned, and he's black. So he is a mixed multitude, okay? He's Babylon. So just what I've shown you, Osinga in Chiapas is extremely tall with all those pyramids and terraces and multiple pyramids. And then this BBC article also talks about Cholula as the largest pyramid in the world. Beneath a tiny church hiding under tufts of grass, trees, and soil is an ancient pyramid of gigantic proportions standing 350 meters wide and 66 meters tall from end to end. The Great Pyramid of Cholula is the equivalent of 9 Olympic-sized swimming pools. An obscure temple no one's heard of, Cholula holds an impressive array of records. It's the largest pyramid on the planet with a base 4 times larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza and nearly twice the volume. So it's not as high, but it's bigger. Never mind the largest pyramid, it's the largest monument ever constructed anywhere by any civilization to this day. And it's known as the man-made mountain, Teotihuacán. Thanks to the church on top, it's also the oldest continuously occupied building on the continent. And that's due to the church being on top. So it shows you what religion that church has been maintaining. All right, so that's something to think about. So once again, where's the largest pyramid in the world? The world's largest pyramid is Pueblo, Mexico. And it's the Pyramid of Cholula. It has a giant church on top. This is not a hill, it's part of the pyramid, the structure leading towards the top. It was built 2,300 years ago. It was ridiculously hard to find because it was buried under mounds. Cortez missed it when he invaded, and it wasn't rediscovered until 1910. Of course, we know why, because it was sought to be hidden. It's the largest monument ever constructed and is similar in structure to the Pyramid of the Sun. It's about 9 Olympic swimming pools long. It has almost twice the volume as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's 4 times as large. Notice the 6.6. 450 meters wide. There are over 400 human burials around the pyramid, which means it would be used for human sacrifice, being an ancient place of worship. Now they say in the 7th or 8th century it was abandoned Now that's around the time the Tartarians took off, right? The Khazars through the Ashkenazis. Today it's an attraction for the keen eye. So you know my theory, it's over on my Live Like Well channel on Esau going and destroying all of that land and really doing a big cover-up came out of me realizing that there was an area called Chichen Itza, which was both Russian and Isarian, right beside the Mayan kingdoms. And it seems that they destroyed everything. It's not literally written in the documents I looked at, but I was kind of shown that in the spirit. So I did this video on Esau, how he kind of destroyed the West. So you can look at that on Live Like Well, but I'm going to rework it because I was still exploring and I've got a clearer picture on exactly what happened. I wasn't as clear at the time, but I do kind of show you his genealogy and so on. So it's interesting for that. Also, the Arabs enslaved the Russians initially. And I think it was actually at the point of the Great Reset that they finally came out of their full slavery to rule as the Gentiles in America, after all the mud floods and everything. We're going to see when we start looking at Japheth, and in our next episode, that the Tartarians were the wild men from the north used to tear down and cover up the Western Empire and then raise up in it as the Gentiles. And of course, this is why so many of them were probably actually Amorites. They probably were Gog and Magog, descended from giants. And that's who the Americans are when they say, I'm an American. That's really who they are. The Moors talk about the Moabites from the land of Moab who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa. All right, and they were the founders of the current Moroccan Empire. I'm not so sure about that. With their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren, okay, who sojourned in the land of Canaan seeking new homes. Now, I still believe that's the border that Israel entered into to return to their land, so I'm not so sure about that. Their dominion and inhabitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa across the Atlantis, even to present North, South, and Central America, Mexico, and Atlantis Islands before the great earthquake that caused the Great Atlantic Ocean. So there was a great earthquake again that caused the Atlantic Ocean. There wasn't an Atlantic Ocean there before. It was 7 streams. It was the Riat Sea and it was the Ethiopic Sea or River Nile, okay? That's actually what I believe. Something like that, some combination thereof. The Moors had control of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Okay, this is why the U.S. Marines sing of defeating the Moors from the halls of Montezuma, Mexico, to the shores of Tripoli. Okay? And what do we have connecting to that? What it seems like here is that maybe the Moors were a mix of all these people, because the scripture says the nations have taken a counsel against Israel, and this includes their own brethren. It's the worst are the Edomites, the Chaldeans, the Moabites, the Ishmaelites. These are all the people who were part of selling Joseph into slavery. So this is a grand replay of all of that, and those nations taking counsel against and conspiring against Israel. Okay, now we're talking about the lands of Ham, so that includes even the Hamites and the Egyptians. Okay, but sometimes a friend sticks closer than a brother, right? So there were a lot of unions that the Hamites had with Israel. Okay, but nonetheless, I don't want to get you confused, because you know my mind goes all over the place. I was made for this, as they say, right? So this particular time, I was made for it. So yeah, so I just want you to see the connection between the Moabites, the Ishmaelites, all of them doing all of this work to confuse and hide the East and West and do all of these sorts of things. So these are all Shemites, but they're mixed with these other nations. So they're like phony AFIYAHs, phony Asians, or phony AFIYAHs. So these are all the people who congregated with Esau to conspire against Israel and mixed in with Ham. We see again in this Pangea that there wasn't an ocean between Africa and America. They were connected. There were a great many conflagrations and earthquakes that separated them. And that's even after the fall of the temple, the punishment that was upon Israel, multiple punishments upon the Egyptians, on the Hamites. These are the kinds of things that drove the continents apart. So now the Asiatic research just talks about this flood again. Atlantis was overwhelmed with a flood. And it seems by Atlantis we should understand the antediluvian earth, over which the 10 princes were born to rule according to the mythology of the West. So again, Atlantis was part of the West. And it says but 7 of them only stayed upon the throne according to the Paratuks. The names of these islands are Jambu, or India, Kusha, Plaksha, Samali, or Samala, so Somali, right? Kranskala, or Kranda, or Saka, or Pushkara. Okay? Thus the 10 divisions of Atlantis were all destroyed by a flood except one called Gades, which was understood as Spain. I think I might have already gone over this. All right, so we went into this already. That they use these words, para again. Para is something that the Africans use for face, parkaim, face of Ham, right? So, this is again Asiatic researches. Countries towards the west are denominated apar. So this is again Africa. Its derivatives are aparam, aparnea, aparkala, aparad, aparkara, aparakam. So that would be face of Ham, aparakam. Yah's face of Ham, right? This division is used in scripture, which the appellations parkam, as in, so that's me saying Ham or Kemet, right? And Ophir signify the countries to the east and to the west. So they're saying they're both east and west. I suppose if you go around in a circle, they kind of are. But they're actually not. Because things are what they are in scripture, according to Yah. These denominations are not deducible from the Hebrew. Okay, they're saying they're not deducible from the Hebrew, but only the Sanskrit language. And apar and aparka are the same with Ophir, Afar, and Africa. The Hebrew word for Ophir, which we went into already without points, well, there are no vowel points in Hebrew. There's only vowel points in Yiddish brew, which is in Hebrew, is written Ophir. The learned bishop Loeth derives Africa from Opir or Ophir. That country, we're told, was thus called from a certain Apros or Apharos. So you see the word coming back to Pharoh, right? Pharos, Phros, Aphros, right? Who was the son of Saturn and the nymph AFIYAH, according to Pascal, the Pascal Chronicle. Okay? So here it is again. Africa is not Africa. Africa is in the West. They call Western Europe and they call Africa, West Africa, and because they're trying to confuse you. They're trying to make East, West, and West, East, when that's not what Jubilees says. It says the land of the East and the South were given to Shem. All right? So here again in Asiatic Researchers, page 296, it goes again into Ophara Aphras. I'm going to go into a little bit of this East-West thing, but first let's remember, I just want to remind you about Babylon, Mitzrayim, Atlantis, all being the same thing, and America, all being the same people, same religion. Please just remember, as I've said before, Babylon is Mitzrayim. Also, it is Egypt, and it is Atlantis. It's all of those, okay? It's Atlantis, Mitzrayim, and Egypt, even though we've seen that Egypt is not really Egypt. But when you're talking about the land of Nimrod, you're talking about the land of Mitzrayim, you're talking about the land of captivity, Atlantis, land of the giants, land of people who worship the giants. It's all Babylon, it's all Babel, it's all prophets of Baal, it's all priests of On. And Solomon's power brokers goes into this. Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, was the daughter of a priest of On, Babel On, and she was the wife of Joseph in Egypt because their priests were priests of On, priests of Babylon. Okay? And in Jasher 1630, it says they made Rachion Pharaoh prefect under Osiris, king of Mitzrayim. So, you know, they're always calling all the Babylonian kings Osiris. Okay, so it's a title for a king in Babylon. And it says he's king of Mitzrayim. So it's the same thing. Atlantis, Babylon, Mitzrayim, they're all the same thing. America, Amorite-ka, okay? And of course we know Esau killed Nimrod and so inherited Babylon. Esau's symbol is the eagle and Babylon's symbol is the eagle. And Egypt's symbol is the eagle. They'll say, oh, it's the phoenix, but it's really the eagle, okay? And Encyclopedia Britannica 1771 says Cairo was known as On, okay? It's the ancient city of Egypt that stood where Cairo is in the land of Edom, okay? And they all practice the worship of the dead. It's all the same religion. And it's all coming out of Ham and his offspring, okay? And Ham, of course, means pig. And so we know it's a form of Satanism. Reminding you one more time, there was a conspiracy to hide the West. To hide the West and call West East and East West and do all of this kind of thing. So they say that Plato said that North America was to be guarded, okay? Prehistoric Central America was to be guarded. Why? Because they were switching identities, hiding Egypt, switching the people, making Israelites the Egyptians and the Egyptians Israelites or Asians, okay? So that's what Aristotle says. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules was discovered Carthage, and it was decided that the Senate decreed that no one under the penalty of death should voyage thither. And Aristotle was born 380 years before Christ. So they had all of this time to tear down the West, to do whatever they wanted to it, in order that Babylon could be set up in its place. And so that was after the second Babylon. Now the third Babylon would be prepared and that land would be set apart. Common saying when I was a girl that you would hear in movies like British movies or, you know, talk shows and stuff from old books where people would say East is East and West is West. Like somehow it was being confused, right? And so you may think, oh, this is because they really discovered the world was a globe in the 1500s and so it confused everybody. It wasn't a flat earth and they were so ignorant. But the truth is that something was being changed. And so, like I said, this is the one that used to echo in my head. But so a discussion on the migration of the Ephraimite tribes may bring some clarity to this. It's often said that Yehuda, Levi, Benjamin returned to Israel after the first Babylonian captivity, but Simeon and Ephraim also did. And so did Manasseh. So Joseph, the tribe of Joseph, basically did with Simeon. They returned. One thing we have to understand is that certain lands were allotted to the descendants of Shem, and that includes Mount Ararat, which is actually far east of, and in the direction of east is towards India, very much east of Poland and all of these Slavic countries. Okay, it's just right on the border of Russia. That was Shem's land. Okay, and so there's this, in this one primeval language, it just goes into the procession or movement of the tribes as they moved away from the original land of AFIYAH. And it says Ephraim first migrated from Media to the Caspian Sea from the westward to reach Afghanistan. So here they're calling the land of Shem or AFIYAH the westward, the west, even though the land of Shem was in the south and the east, and they're ascribing, and so it says they go eastward, okay? As they were scattering, they went eastward towards Afghanistan, etc. And so we can see, even in the description of Shem's land, it says that his land included Elam and India and Kapthor, and it included Mount Ararat, and it included everything that was, I think it's west of the Euphrates. They'll say west or south of it. Jubilees 9 says, Shem and his sons to the east of the river Tigris till it approaches the east, the whole land of India and the Red Sea on its coast, and the waters of Dedan and the mountains of Meribah and Elah and the land of Shushan, and all that is on the side of Parmak to the Red Sea and the river Tina. So, you know, I hate to go into this, but that's a lot of land heading eastward. And up into the mountains of Ararat were included in Shem's land. So what's happened now is that Japheth has taken over a lot of that land in this redrawing of the maps. But I just want you to understand in this book, see, it talks about the Israelites and how there were a couple of Afghan tribes that were Israelite tribes called Menenkal and Mesenkal. And that's very close to the name of one of the pyramids. So this is again reinforcing that the Egyptians were not Hamites, that they were actually Negroes, and they weren't necessarily pyramid worshipping people, although Solomon eventually, you know, practiced those things. But yeah, the banks of the Tigris River were very numerous in the south and west of Persia. So these are some of the lands where they settled in, and see, these are some of the borders of Shem. And I'm only saying this because nowadays they call these lands Asia, and they call these the true Israelites, and that includes the Chinese and the East Indians are supposed to be the true Asians, AFIYAHs, right? And so here's more to that. It then says here that the tribes, the 10 tribes, migrated again west of Afghanistan to a place called Kohi Baba, 20 or 30 miles west of Kabul. So we see where Kabul is, that's where the red dot is. And so they were west of that. And so that means they were closer to Afghanistan, okay? They were closer to on the Afghanistan side of that red dot, okay? And so they're saying west is towards Africa. And it says there's no marked limit between the Astudana, the country west of the meridian of Mokur. So it says there's this meridian of Mokur here. So that would indicate that there's some kind of division of east-west, north-south, but it no longer exists anymore. Nobody talks about the meridian of Mokur. If you find it, please let me know in the notes. I'd love to hear about it. So this is how they're heading east and towards India and everything, calling that the east. So whenever you see the word bull, then you're seeing something that is Hamitic, because they worship the bull, Cyrus the bull. Okay, so Kabul. And there's a lot of cities named that in the east here, so-called east. But what I'm trying to show you is that they're now at this point, as they're tracking the dispersion and scattering, they keep calling Africa west, okay? And they're calling Western Europe west, all right, to do the switcheroo. I have to tell you, in these ancient books, this direction actually was described as westward before. Now it's been switched back to eastward because I have a hacker on my computer. And I also went online to look at the other books, and the pages were blurred out, the other versions of this ancient book. But I'm going to work with this anyway. So my point in showing you all of this was that there was a switch in directions from eastward to westward. And what we do know from this particular slide is that there was a meridian set up here that is no longer there. A meridian that was designating west. And that still remains, despite the gaslighting. So the meridian of Mokur is gone, and of course Kor was one of the sons of Ham. As I said in my earlier videos, Moses in the book of Jasher actually goes and rules in Cush. He rules in Cush in the land of Ham. And when he is there, and it's written in the actually Quran, that he built the Great Wall of China to keep the giants out, to keep Gog and Magog out. So he built the Great Wall of China and the Great Wall of India, because they're the same wall. They're both in northern India and China, okay? Northern India and China have the Great Wall of India and the Great Wall of China, but they're the same, okay? And they're both built by Moses according to the Quran, to keep out Gog and Magog. So this is kind of like how the land got all kind of moved around and switched around.
There's historical reference that Alexander the Lesser, that they call great, built a bronze and a brass wall in the Caucasus to keep out the invasion from the north of Gog and Magog. Did we all know that? Huh? Wait a minute. Okay. It's not only just one time here. There's an entire appendix of 5 pages that breaks down this wall. And for those who really love history as I do, if you do the research on the Great Wall of China, you will find out why the Sinim or the Chinese built that wall and who they were trying to keep out from coming in from the north. Who's directly north of China other than who? Mongolia and who? Russia. Magog. Directly north.
That's right.
What about the historical reference with the making of the Euro-Gentile, the white man? In one of the sections in here, it says, and Moses, for Moses knew their intent, was responsible for erecting a wall 666 miles from one end of the Caucasus to the other end of the Caucasus to keep the barbarians, to keep Gog and Magog from descending down from the north into the Holy Land. And they say, O Zolkarneim, Gog and Magog people do great mischief in the earth. Shall they render thee tribute in order that you might erect a barrier or a wall between them?
So, this is more information on the migration of Chinese. China migrates from Shinar, okay, and it says that they were scattered. Chinese people were scattered from the plain of Shinar, having separated the people by language at the Tower of Babel. The Most High then scattered them to the land of Shinar to populate the earth. Moses records in the Genesis account, and the Yahuwah scattered them from there over the face of the earth, etc. And so the people would migrate. And what I'm showing you here is that these are all the pyramids that are in Asia and in kind of the Tartaria area. Just trying to show you the relationship they have with Mitzrayim, with the West, with Africa being America. And so they are people who construct pyramids because that is what Ham does. So when we head over to the east here, we find that in the Travels of Marco Polo, it says that Cathay, on page 98, is east of the Manzi. In other words, it says the province of Chengfu is 20 days' ride westward to another province bordering Manzu called Chengju-Tufel. And it says that the Yangtze runs into the ocean 80 to 100 journey days away on page 99. And the Great Khan's officials collect gold there. Okay, well, now we know how the Chinese wear this high percentage gold, right, or fur. Now the map clearly says it's Kami Regi, which is Kemet, Ham. Ham's region. Can is a word for Canaan, but it also means king, right? According to the Hamites, right? Khan and Ham, or Kemet. And this is the lineage of Ham. And wasn't Captorum, Cathay, one of the sons of Ham? So what we're going to find out is that there are many earthquakes, violent disruptions, conflagrations that destroyed, again, the land of Ham. And so he had to scatter over into the land of Japheth and into the land of Shem to preserve himself. He was also close by there because the continents were closer together. But this was not the main land. This was Asia Minor, not Asia Major. It says here that this map covers some of Ham's land, and we notice that, again, Chengfu is 20 days' ride westward. Okay, so just another image of the same thing. We go in close here, and we see the land. We see Cathay. And we're going to find out there were great conflagrations and explosions and everything that destroyed Cathay. So this may not have been it. This may be a new Cathay. Even here we have this land, Kamchatka. If we go back over to the other side of the ocean, we have Siberia here, we have Russia here, and then we have this land, Kamchatka here. Kemet. Kamchatka. Kemet. There's the Bering Crossing. Here's Kamchatka. This was all connected before. No longer is, but Kemet, Ham. So Lemuria, an ancient continent, is now sunk beneath the waters of the Indian Ocean, which, lying to the south of Asia today, stretched on one hand eastward to Upper India and Sunda Island, and to the other west as far as Madagascar and Africa. So they covered so much land, and that's how much land Ham lost due to sin. You know, these could also be the Arctic lands where all the giants and fallen angels are dwelling. Who knows? That's why they're in other people's lands, right? And so this map here that I always show, I've been showing since I've been doing these videos of North America, really demonstrates how the land here was connected. And this is Azareth and everything, Cathay up here. So now all of this is underwater. So we're just talking now about North America, right? But these are the lands of Ham. This is where all the land of Ham would be. Yeah, so we're going to get into some of these lands. Look, here's Mu out there. So we're going to talk about the destructions and way more stuff I have here for you guys so that you can understand how all this happened. And then after that, we'll go on to Japheth, which I've been promising you guys for a while, and I know other channels are now covering because we know that I cover a lot of this stuff. And then other channels follow suit, which is, you know, flattery, I guess. It is, because there are some pretty good channels. But yeah, I've just done so much on Japheth. I was like, I can't even deal with him unless I deal with Ham, because Ham was the first empire. So we're going to go a little bit into the appearance and look of the people who appeared in these lands afterwards, but we're going to is in the next episode, and their descriptions, where they came from, that kind of thing. And also we're going to go over some of these conflagrations, these explosions and earthquakes and mud floods and all of the madness that created what is America now today. And probably even a little bit of a touching on Esau as usual again, and Israel and Japheth and how they all tie together as usual, because they're all related. And please feel free to go over to Live Light Well to watch that video. I'll put it in the playlist for these videos here, but the one on Esau and also the lands of Shem if you're interested. But I will be going over all of it all over again, doing new videos with all the new information that I have. So may Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, and give you peace. And please like, subscribe, share. Please make a donation. Donations are appreciated to livelightwell.com. For $20 or more, you can get a calendar or a cookbook. But always remind me, for the new year, they'll be brand new. But please make a donation. Your support is appreciated. And thank you for everyone who's donated. Shalom.
Israel, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh. Give him thanks by saying hallelujah.